Welcome. It's great to be back for our PHRN, or Poultry Health Research Network, seminar series. We're just going to be returning for the season, and our first guest speaker today is Dr. Denis Carrier, and Denis works for Merck Animal Health Canada. Denis Carrier earned his DMB from the University of Montreal. Over his veterinary career, he worked in Canada and in the USA with leading animal health companies, where he contributed in the areas of technical services, product development, regulatory affairs, sales management, international product launch, and marketing. He's currently the technical services veterinarian for poultry with Merck Animal Health Canada, which consists of assisting customers by developing projects and protocols to improve broilers, breeders, and layer health and production. He balances his free time between a mix of regular outdoor and gym activities, as well as gathering with friends and family.
Pretty simple. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. So for those in the audience that are from the academia, you will find this rather basic. Really, it pertains to everything we can do, little things in the farm, in the hatchery, in order to try to make our coccidiosis vaccination program successful. So we'll touch a little bit on coccidiosis and intestinal health. We'll dive into coccidiosis vaccination, talk about brooding, not all aspects of brooding, but the aspect of brooding that are critical for making the coccidiosis vaccine work. I put a list of 3 slides of things to avoid, things that we see commonly, and that really should not be happening if you want to make the coccidiosis vaccine work. And then I think one of the most important part is going to be spending some time on monitoring, simple monitoring, and monitoring activities that are really able to tell us or give us an idea of what we're doing. And if we make a management change, we're actually able to see some of the change. That's what we will be looking at. So first, coccidiosis, it's caused by a protozoan. They are called Emeria. It's everywhere there is chicken. You'll have a new barn in a new region, there will be coccidia that will show up. So you cannot raise chicken without having some coccidia. Way back in the wild, because of low bird density, it didn't cause a problem. The bird gets exposed to a small amount of coccidia, develop immunity, and it really does not impair its performance, its reproduction, and anything like that. With intensification, coccidiosis has become a problem because it's an organism that is very, very prolific, and we cannot eradicate it. We tried in the past with the product to try to suppress it, but it's so prolific, and because it develops resistance rapidly, so we have to learn to manage it. So we have to learn to live with it, but just so that it happens in low numbers when we want it. The life cycle, there's a part of the life cycle that happens in the intestine, and there's a part that's happening outside of the bird in the environment. So it's a direct life cycle. You don't need intermediate host. So it's a fecal oral mode of transmission. So it's excreted in the feces, and then you will re-ingest it a few days later. And it's also self-limiting. So if you ingest several oocysts, and then it runs its course, it makes lesions, it causes disease. And if the oocysts are excreted, if that bird is removed from those oocysts, or if those oocysts do not sporulate, for example, then the disease is over. It is self-limiting that way. Key things there is that from ingestion to shedding, it's about 4 to 7 days, dependent on the species and the strain. And this is programmed. That's the genetic programming of each various strain. No matter what you do, if you put an oocyst in a bird, and if it gets processed like with enzymes and activities of the gizzard, something will come out 4 to 7 days later. And then from shedding to sporulation, if everything is right in the litter, depending on species, it can happen as early as 12 hours. On average, if everything is right, it will happen around 18 hours. So in general, we talk about it takes a day. But we need to keep in mind that if everything is right when those oocysts land on the ground, they can sporulate, and then they become infectious. Now, if they don't sporulate, if the conditions are not correct, which is oxygen, temperature, and humidity, if the conditions are not correct, it will stay there, and it will take a long time before it sporulates. And it's very, very resistant. So, and then once it's sporulated, it's very resistant too, and then it will get picked up by a bird. So from sporulation to ingestion, when we vaccinate, that's what we want to manage. And we can manage bird density for that part to make sure that there is ingestions, because we need re-ingestion when we vaccinate. And then as far as managing sporulation, we need to manage moisture in the barn. So really, in a nutshell, that's the summary of what we can do to manage vaccination or manage a coccidiosis vaccine in a barn. Manage moisture and manage density. And that's totally the responsibility of the farm manager. So when we think about coccidiosis, we think about mortality, like blood on the ground, cecal coccidiosis. We're thinking about immunosuppression and immunosuppression. We're thinking about poor doing bird. It affects growth, it affects yield, it affects overall performance. Whoa. However, if we manage coccidiosis, the consequences are minimal. And the way to do that is to have a low or early controlled challenge in an immunocompetent bird that has a healthy digestive system. Appears simple, but not always that easy. There's a lot of things that needs to come together to have a healthy immunocompetent chicken. Okay, sorry. So when we talk about intestinal health or gut health in general term, we talk about a balanced flora, healthy mucosa. And what it means, it's a flora that is, or an intestine that is free of excessive parasites or other irritants to the mucosa. And I say excessive because it's amazing, like the birds have a capacity to cope and to deal with a certain amount of insult. We also need highly digestible ingredients that are free of bad attributes. And nutritionists in the room, I'm not sure if there's any, but when they formulate, they manage with a lot of anti-nutritional factors. Depending on the quality of the ingredients you're having, you need to put binders into the feed, like mycotoxin, biogenic amine, and so on. And that's a fact of life. Like feed ingredient is not always set in stone and not always ideal. And then we need to maintain a steady state eating. Anytime that something happens in the barn where a bird eats too much, too fast, we disrupt that steady eating pattern. We create the chance of a disturbance in the intestine, bacterial overgrowth, and set up the bird for enteritis. Enteritis is a general term that means inflammation of the intestine. It can be caused by bacteria, viruses, but also organisms or things like physical irritants. So most problem really, it's never just one thing when we have a condition in a poultry barn. It's a combination of factors, and there was an initial trigger. It might be very minor. It could be just because field malabsorption or a stress. So most problems are initiated by some form of irritant, whether it's infectious or not, followed by an imbalance of the intestinal flora. In real life, it appears very simple, and we know for ourselves, right? In real life, it's a real challenge to balance all of that. We never have perfect chick in the perfect weather, the perfect water, perfect ingredients, and so on. Sometimes what happens to that flock can carry to the next. Like sometimes like it's not just because it's 6 weeks that it's going to be over when it's done. Sometimes some things can carry over. You need to think about that. I would say that the art of raising chicken is that every flock is unique. So when you receive those chicks, you have to deal with it in the context where you are right now with the current season, the current batch of chick. Like they're not always all the same, always top. Like it varies. We need to understand the biology of the various organisms, and then you need to manage according to that. So adjust according to that. So there's a bit of an art. Like you cannot just follow that recipe book of by that day I do that, and by that day I do that at that level. So what I wanted to say on that slide is coccidiosis can be managed different way. Traditionally, it's been managed by using anticoccidials in the feed. And it's been very successful in providing stable results for a long, long time. However, there are occasions where you can have reduced efficacy or performance that you don't like anymore, so you look for alternative. Coccidiosis, you can vaccinate against coccidiosis, and it is a viable alternative. So what needs to happen to have going from Coccidia vaccination to immunity? 4 things. Very simple. First, we need to give an adequate dose of live spore-related oocyst to the bird. It's typically done in the hatchery, and it's the responsibility of the hatchery to do that. Several things can go wrong there, but they are specialists in managing that, and they're doing an amazing job. Then the coccidia needs to develop in the bird, but if it's alive and if it's in the bird, no matter what, it's going to come out at the end 4 to 7 days later. And then the farm manager, what they need to do, they need to support sporulation and support reingestion. And I will repeat that a few more times in the talk, so like you should know it by now. Adequate initial dose can be influenced by, of course we administer the vaccine, there is the equipment, but after we've given the vaccine, we expose the chick to some light to encourage preening. We add a dye to make sure that they will be attracted to that. And temperature is important. In hatchery, we want chicks to be comfortable so that they will want to be looking at each other, but also on farm, when the chick arrive on the farm, we want them to be at the right body temperature in a farm that is at the right temperature, so that it's going to get going right away. In the birds, it's going to happen no matter what, and depending on the species, it develops at different sites in the intestine and at different and lesions have different severities. When the oocyst is excreted, it is non-sporulated. With moisture plus oxygen plus temperature, it will sporulate. So the moisture, no, not the moisture, the oxygen and the heat you have because you have chicken in the barn. So the component sometimes that is more difficult is to maintain that healthy relative humidity around the barn relative humidity at around 60-65% during that whole period, up to about 7 to 10 days. Most of the moisture in the barn, a lot of it comes from the droppings, comes from the birds breeding. In Ontario, a lot of time, we have no effort to make. Like I've seen flocks in August where placement, like relative humidity is 80%. And in flocks like that, we open up a bit earlier because we know that cycling is going to go really, really hard. Like it does not need to go that hard. In Alberta, a lot of time, we need to spray with a hose or with buckets, or sometimes people, what they do is they would have the spray system for cooling the bird. During the day, they would open that like 1 minute intermittently, for example, just to try to help keep the moisture in that barn early on. And remember that moisture is what is recommended for starting the chicks. I would say this is one of the very, very critical factor. And sometimes when we add too much moisture, I agree, I've seen it, sometimes it goes too hard. We get a little bit more cycling than what we would like to see. And maybe we'll see a little bit of blood, like a bit of cecal coccidiosis. But that, again, that will be self-limiting as we open. So we learn and we try to manage it not as aggressive the following time. Another thing about moisture is that when we have a lot of birds in a small area, they produce a lot of, with breeding, a lot of moisture. If we have a lot of space, there's much less. And there's another thing that density does for us. When there's a high density, it facilitates the birds expressing that natural behavior where they would pick at the litter, something shiny, and they're going to just pick at it. And in that process, they're going to pick oocysts. And hopefully those oocysts will be sporulated, and that will reinitiate the cycle. All right. One of the key things when we brood chicken, we get the barn ready at least 1 day before, but ideally 3 days before, like the correct heat, the correct humidity at the level of the chick. Why are we doing all that? We just want the chicken to, when they get in the barn, to be ready and go. They don't have to look. There's water right there. There's feed right there. Everything, and it's comfortable. That's why we do that. That's why brooding condition is so important. We want that to be a stress-free event when they arrive in the barn. So for coccidiosis and for the bird, the most important step, eat, oxygen, feed, and water, all at the comfort zone at the chick level. And if they are comfortable, they're going to feed, they're going to drink. Generally, we talk about a temperature of greater than 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius. You will see variation there, like I've seen up to 34, 35. It will vary based on people have developed experience. Sometimes genetic companies have different recommendations, but typically it's in that ballpark. Consistently also they talk about 60 to 70% relative humidity in the barn to start. So it's really within what's ideal for coccidiosis. Now if you maintain 70% relative humidity for too long, as the birds gets bigger, it will become problematic. It might become problematic. So I'm not saying you maintain that for the whole grow out, but for that critical 2 weeks, it becomes really important to favor cycling. And if you see that the condition in the barn starts to get not too good with some ammonia or wet litter, you have to take that moisture out too. So we have ventilation to manage that. Crop fill. This is something that we monitor. The recommendation is to monitor that after 2 hour, 8 hour, 12 hour, 24 hour, and after 2 days. The guideline says that the goal is to get 95% gut fill after 24 hours. However, I challenge producers to challenge themselves to do better than that. Because if they do better than that, like a chick that has not eaten after 2 days is going to be history. And so if more chicks get going and the conditions are right and that they eat early, so the crop fill is a way to measure that they've ingested feed and water, they're a healthy chick. And in a healthy chick, the Coccidia vaccine will work. And that bird will be sustain the challenge that's going on. Also, weight gain. Like the guideline says, okay, day 7, chicks should be 4 times their initial weight. Well, make sure you track on that. And if you're slipping, why are you slipping? Is there little things that you can adjust in your management to improve that? And I cannot give the recipe for that because it's every farmer, every barn, they have their own, they know their barn and they know the hatchery they work with, and they will receive advice from several people. So bottom line, strong chicks eat, they will have a healthy intestine, and hopefully they'll be immunocompetent. Okay, so that's what brooding for successful coccidiosis should look like. The barn condition is all set up several days before the chicks arrive. Yes, it costs eats, it costs electricity, But you want to have the condition before. You want the litter to be at the right humidity. Sometimes it comes in, it's too humid, so you want it to dry. You want the cement at the level to be at the right temperature. You can see here that there is paper everywhere. So the paper, what it does, it allows you to put feed on it. So there's feed everywhere. So when the chicken is placing on the farm, there's no choice but to find feed. It's there. Same thing for water. There's a water line here. There's supplemental drinkers there. So there's within a feet of the chick going around, there's feed and water. Hopefully he finds it. There's brood guard. In that case, it's about, in that barn, they brooded about to a third of the barn. And what we see, dependent on regions, in Ontario, most people that use brood guards will go around 50%. In Alberta, where it's more dry, they take it a bit smaller, for example, because they need a bit more density to create a bit more moisture. And we want full light for the first 7 days at least, because we want them to find the water, find the feed, getting trained in finding that. Another benefit of the paper is that the droppings just stays right there as opposed to falling through the litter. So we think it might be a bit easier to recycle oasis that way. So that's a nice Ontario farm. We talked about that. They must have access to their droppings. So the density, what it is though, if there's more birds and more dropping in a small area, there's just more chance that that chick will have a chance to re-ingest an oocyst. If you keep that for too long though, it's going to explode in your hands. So it's a bit of a fine art of knowing when to open the brooder or to remove them. So I have some of my colleagues and I have some people that prescribe a time to remove the brood guard. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it depends on the barn condition. You want to remove the brood guards after your first cycle is completed, so 4 to 7 days after vaccination, after it's sporulated, and after they've been given a chance to ingest those sporulated oocysts. So what you want to do then, you want to open the brood guard so that that second generation of oocysts will be shed in the broader area. So you will see the rest of the barn. You won't have just oocysts in that small area. And typically, a lot of time it's around that 8 to 11 days of age. That's pretty much the earliest that it's happened. I've seen occasion where at 11 days, it's going hard, we have to open up. And I've seen situation where the litter is not developing well, it's not moist, and we keep it a bit longer to allow a bit more development and more cycling happening, and it works as well. And talking about litter that is developing, that is nice for coccidiosis, take the litter, and if you open your hand, it all falls, like it's all very dry and there's nothing left, it's too dry. If you take it and you make a fist and it makes a ball, it's way too wet. So in between where you take it and there's, some falls off, but there's a kind of a like it feels like it wants to stay together, but it does not, then that litter is really developing nicely. And it's around 2 weeks that you normally get to that point, but I've seen barns where it's wet, where around 10 days you have that, like it's going really fast. I better accelerate. So we talked about that. So that's the kind of that tool that the farmer has to manage coccidia cycling. It's very important to have healthy chick, and Merck is a vaccine company, so I will say, okay, make sure that the parents are well vaccinated, make sure that chick are vaccinated against appropriate disease as well. But Merck disease, infectious bursal disease, are immunosuppressive disease, like really every bird should be vaccinated against that in Ontario. Vitality in hydration, like to have a dehydrated chick happens once in a while. That does not help. And there's a guideline of the on arrival temperature as well. Okay, so feed So you try to get the best chicks, and you try to get the best feed. It's not always easy, but don't cheapen out on feed. Like, I see those, people try to go for the, get a deal, get cheaper. I think you get what you pay for. In particular, for the pre-starter and the starter. You need to have highly digestible ingredients. Remember, if more of the protein goes back to the back of the intestine, it will favor the proliferation of bacteria that you don't want, like Coccidium and others, so creating that dysbacteriosis. So if it's highly digestible and all the digestions happen in the intestine, where it should be, you'll have less chance of enteric disease. There is tons of research around support the early immune response and the healing of intestinal cells. Remember that the coccidiosis vaccine is a stress on the bird. We're going to cause lesion. When it multiplies, it invades into a cell and it destroys that cell. That's how the immunity happens. So we need to support that. Texture of the feed, like if it's too granular or too much dust or too much of a broad variation in texture, it's going to be a stress on the intestine as well. And there's a lot of alternatives to antibiotics that are marketed, and some have their place. Some have some application. Now, don't wait to start to see dead birds before you intervene. Look at every farm. They have the water meter, and they know how much feed is consumed, like in the feed bin, like you know exactly. As soon as you see a small drop that you cannot explain because it was hotter yesterday, go in and intervene with something. So a lot of it, like way back, like it will date me, but when I learned, like when I learned. With my mentor, veterinarian, we would walk a barn and we would hear a couple little things. And right away we would add, a little bit of a vitamin booster with a little bit of, vitamin P or whatever. No, but not joking, but with antibiotics actually. So we were very quick there would be a mixture of electrolytes and vitamins, but there would always be a little bit of antibiotic. And it was, at first sign, we would not wait to see that. Today, it's not responsible to do that anymore. It was probably not back then, but it was just common practice. So companies, veterinarians have developed like interventions that they do that are non-antibiotic, but if you intervene early, I think they have an effect. One parenthesis for long-lived pullets, there is Emeria nicatrix. Emeria nicatrix takes a bit longer to, it's a bit less prolific, and it takes a few more cycles before immunity is developed. And sometime if, we will have a good immunity against everything else, but the barn got dry a bit too quickly, and then we will have a bit of a nicatrix outbreak later on, when the pullets are a bit older or early into the breeder barn. And so that's why that species is a little bit more particular. So we need to maintain the barn condition, favorable for sporulation, and oocyst reingestion a little bit longer. And it's a whole other set of challenge in breeders because we start restricting feeding at that time, and it's really not easy. I don't have the solution for that. All right. Avoid stumping vaccine oocyst. Avoid killing the vaccine. Some people treat with amprolium as a routine. Amprolium is an anticoccidial. So people are afraid that the vaccine is too hot, that the vaccine causes damage to the intestine. So at 10 days, 2 weeks, they come in and they want to kind of nip it in the bud. It used to be advocated a bit more, but no longer. Don't do that. Don't do that. Communicate. Make sure that your feed company knows that you're using a vaccine, that you don't want an anticoccidial in your feed, because it will neutralize. It will kill the oocyst from the vaccine. It happens. If your barn is it's very dry, like it's going to take much longer, it's not going to be effective. Oh, the paper. That paper, some people throw it away. No, just spread it out. Like if you're in cage, take it to the next cage. But if you're on the floor, you either leave it there, like 7 to 10 days, it's all gone in a way, like it's all broken. Or if it's not gone, we can just move it away to the rest of the barn. It's not going to cause like a pile up or problem. Don't throw it away, like it contains good stuff. Some antibiotics can interfere with coccicycline, like a high dose of sulfa and tetracyclines. So consider that or be aware of that. Disrupting the steady eating behavior, like should not be running out of feed, but it does happen. Abrupt feed formulation change. We recommend not making an abrupt change like during that necrotic enteritis critical phase, which is typically around 12 to 21 days. And if you do change, make a feed change, try at least to stick with the same ingredient. Don't go to that change, that least cost formulation right away. Just wait a bit later. So keep the same ingredient, don't make an abrupt change. Feed texture change, like the texture change from a pre-starter to a starter to the grower, it needs to be gradual. Lighting program sometimes can be set in such a way that birds will eat too much too fast. So we need to just make sure to adjust your lighting program so that does not happen. Heat stress will cause leaky guts. Excessive litter moisture or caking. I was in a barn the other day and they were like 2-3 weeks old. There was a big area wet. There was just a drinker that was leaking. But guess what? Birds were there, were taking that. Guess what? These birds were sick, like they had intestinal issues. Fix the drinker, yes. Trying to break that behavior or not, managing the barn so that the litter eating behavior does not develop. There should not be overly high amount of ammonia, like tons of barns, like where you go, like the birds are ready to market. It does not smell ammonia. It does not need to smell ammonia in a barn. Like it smells chicken, but it does not need to stick your eyes and itch in your nose. It does not have to. Like you can ventilate. Okay, monitoring plan. I just want to check my time. Oh, we're doing good. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So litter issues can be challenging even based on litter quality or litter type. Do you have a preference over shavings or straw for cycling? I'm going to go out on a limb here and talk about some other issues we're dealing with in terms of like different litters like peat moss that can be very absorbent, but also cause other issues.
Right. So the litter in a barn is our sponge. Actually, so the question was, do I have litter preference? So the way we look at litter in our barn, it's our sponge for humidity that will come from the droppings, comes from the breath. It's also like a cushion to isolate the birds from the cold cement floor. Like the data says that shavings is a little bit more absorbent than straw, and straw that is cut too long is not as absorbent as straw that is cut a bit shorter. So there's a lot of variable there. I like shavings, and I guess it's maybe because I have a bit more experience with that. I've seen publications where this, like sometime if your straw has been, if there's like it's not good quality straw, you can introduce some mycotoxins, having some issues in your bird issues as well. So as far as coccidiosis goes, as long as you're allowed to, coccidiosis and bird health, if you're allowed to keep that litter dry enough, it's fine. There's been the recent cases with the peat moss of the respiratory situation, and peat moss is supposed to be a great litter. In the literature, they say it's supposed to be very absorbent. Pro and con, so it's economical and what people work with. So in the hatchery, they have standard procedure and they validate that. And as a supplier, we go into the hatchery and we help on a regular basis to make sure that the equipment does what it's supposed to do. And then after the vaccine is applied, either by spray or gel droplets, then it goes into like a station for 15 minutes or 20 minutes where there's a lot of light to encourage the preening. We want adequate temperature in that station. We talked about that before. And then after we're done with that station, typically what hatchery will do, for every lot that goes to the barn, they will check the tongue of several birds, like 100 for example, and they will check what percentage of birds ingested some vaccines. So like the color of the tongue is a bit different. And you know what? Like very, very easy, very standard, it's above 90%, above 95%, really often. If we get less than that, then we start to look, okay, how's my spray pattern? How's my preening? Like what's going on? Looking at yes. Actually, no. Although there would be no, like to pass them a second time, there would not be it would not be an overdose. But if it's not like at the high level they want, they will try to correct that. But it's typically not like, if it's nothing, then yes. But it would be a big thing though to take the box from the shipping area and to bring them back in the processing area to run them. And I say no, and maybe they do, but I've never seen it done. Good question. I have to ask that. Where was I? Yes. Okay. What I want to say here, looking at the chick when you receive them on the farm and count how many are colored, how many are red, or how many are green, like is not such a good indication. It's not because it's on the bird that it's inside the bird. So what counts is what's inside the bird. And by the time you get to the farm, like the tongue, the stain on the tongue is already gone. So it's really hard to assess. So for you, like if you're a skeptic farmer or service person going to the farm, what you can do to validate if the chick received live oocyst is to go in at day 6-7. At day 6-7, 99% of the chances are that these are vaccinal oocysts. There's no way those are oocysts that were picked from the barn on day 1. So what we do, we go in around day 6-7, and then we look at, we're going to either take individual fecal sample from individual bird, because believe it or not, 6 to 7 day old, they make very, very small poop that are very, very, very hard to collect. Like it does not look like that. So that would be the easy way to collect some of those droppings. And then to do, like at that time, we just do a flotation. So it's an easy technique, semi-qualitative. Is there oocyst in there or not? And if there are some, you said, it's cycling. Actually give them something. We've done some work with Dr. Brash a couple summers ago, looking at individual fecal sample from live birds. So basically, because finding droppings is so hard, like just take the bird and just with a gentle abdominal massage, like about 50% of the bird will give you a dropping. And if it does not give you one, you just take another one, and they will give you droppings. So looking at that way, because it's not necessary to kill birds all the time to look at things, although we've done in that context. So continuing to the monitoring plan, also what you can do after you've assessed that the hatchery has done some work, you can, from week 1 to 5, you can collect fecal material for OPG. You can keep them in your fridge on the farm. And if you don't need it, throw them out at the end. But if you have a doubt, if there's something going on, they were in the fridge, they're good, then you can submit them. like in the US, they're really big on doing necropsies and intestinal lesion scoring. They start on week 2 and week 3, week 4, week 5. In a complex, they will try to have a representation of every age. And they're big, they're doing that. Way back in my old days, I used to do that. I'm not sure. I don't feel that good about that anymore. I think if there's a problem, yes, but as a routine monitoring, maybe I'm getting soft as I get older, but I don't think it's necessary to kill all those birds. Flock health and performance, very important to look at that. Measure and log the density and humidity that you do. Over time, you will learn and determine, okay, what's the right spot for me in my barn? Make sure that the chick are comfortable and they eat by measuring crop fill and early weight. To me, if we do like collect as a routine, collect fecal sample every 3 days, starting on day 6, 7, you have some material in your fridge, it costs you nothing. And if you need it, if you want to know the dynamic, then you can submit it to the lab. And of course, there are other records you have anyway in the barn. So you have a lot of power as a farmer, really, in terms of what you can do to monitor. And don't always need the lab. Okay, so these are examples of day 6 monitoring that we've done with Dr. Brash. So, 3 farms. And one thing we found, so basically what we did is we took a section of the duodenal loop, so cross-section of the duodenal loop, section in the middle of the intestine around the mechial diverticulum, like including it on each side, and then a cross-section across the 2 ceca and the ileum. Boom. And then Dr. Brash was trying to look for coccidiosis lesions in there. What we learned is that macroscopically with the eyes, there was no lesion. We don't see anything. It's really rare. So, even if we know that the vaccine is cycling, we know it does something, we know it makes intestinal damage. When we look with our eyes and when we look at the microscope, we see very little lesion. So histopathology is not very sensitive to assess, did my birds got vaccinated? Because there was very few lesions and they were so mild. So mild. Like she would see 1 oocyst, something like that, like very mild. Now those birds were dead, so we took the whole intestinal content and did a flotation on that. That gives us a pretty good idea that, oh yeah, that farm got vaccinated, that farm got vaccinated. I think they played a trick on me here. I don't think it was missed. I just think that, anyway, maybe it was. I gave the result and there was no surprise. So I think they sent us somewhere to check. This is another example of looking at individual bird fecal smear. So I was trying to look at, if I can go on a farm, take my fecal sample, take a little bit of a scoop of it, put it on a slide, and look myself at my microscope right there. Like, can I pick it? And I found it in 20% of the birds. In histopathology, Dr. Brash found it in 90% of the birds, but fecal flotation of the whole intestine, they found it in all the birds, so it was well vaccinated. Okay, OPG. When you do an OPG and you submit it, on day 7, you typically will find some. If you find oocysts there, it really tells you it's from the hatchery. Now, what's nice about OPG, it does not kill bird, and it allows you to look at the impact of what you do, like the change you do in terms of management. So in blue, we have a curve where the bird is either low density or too dry. And theoretically, if you increase your density or increase moisture, you will shift that cycle forward earlier. Why do we want to shift the peak? Why do we want it earlier? Because we work hard to get it as early as possible. And that's because of the compensatory growth and early immunity. Plus, there's a lot happening in that period here with the intestinal development, intestinal health. So the sooner we can get coccidiosis immunity done with, the better. And the less it will cost us in performance loss. Okay. So this is a real-life example. Oh, yeah. Real-life example of a good flock starting using a coccidiosis vaccine. Now, this one, mortality ended up being 15%. There was a lot of cholingitis E. coli. There was necrotic wheat inclusion and necrotic enteritis outbreak. Not much coccicycline going on there. So I just want to break the myth that when you have necrotic enteritis, it's always because there was cocci before. No. And this is what you can get to with time, with management. It does not happen to that overnight. But this is an example of a real-life example of someone that now broods, partial house, 70% relative humidity. He's not been vaccinating for too long. I'm expecting that as he will continue, that peak will become lower. It does not need to be that high to be immune, but that's what it is. And then there was all species at day 7. So coccidiosis is an option. Coccidiosis vaccination is an option. It works. It's economically sustainable. However, in all honesty, it does require a little adjustment in your management and in your nutrition to make it work best. I would welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carrier. Does anybody have any questions for Denis?
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, you told about vaccination and management and other best practices to control coccidiosis. Are there any drugs that target the sporulation because they become infective when they are sporulated in the environment? So are there any drugs that target that point? I'm very new to this.
No, not to my knowledge. You could keep the litter very, very dry. It would not sporulate, but that would not be like it. Those are not conditions that you have in the broiler barn. So that would be a nice target to look at. I'm sorry. The question was, is there any drug that would target or that would inhibit sporulation in the litter? And that would be actually a nice idea. And I don't know of any. Yes.
Just a comment about the question. I think acidify the litter could help this to reduce sporulation.
Right. So the comment is that acidification of the litter helps. Sometimes acidification of the litter, like in the US, they do reuse litter. So they would add product to acidify the litter to reduce the oocyst load or the cocci load into the litter for the next flock. And in Canada, I'm not sure how often it's used. I don't see it.
We could always just increase the ammonia, but then there's going to be
ammonia is killing them too.
And health.
Yes. Yeah, ammonia is about the only thing that, as a disinfectant, about the only thing that kills oocysts. But we don't want too much of that when there's birds inside the barn.
Which is not good for the vaccination.
No, and not good for the bird. So remember, we need to do what's good for the bird, and that will be good for the cocci. Remember, they evolve together. So.
And also acidification would not be good for the vaccination take because it reduces the sporulation. Right. So we would like to have these cycles to be continued.
Yeah, so not good then, probably. But my understanding is acidification of the litter is used. I don't know if someone knows more than me, but as far as I know, it's
more between flocks.
It's between flocks. Yeah. But you can argue that it's still there when the next flock is placed.
Between flocks in Canada or in the United States? Because in the United States they use the deep litter. Probably they use them. But in Canada, as far as they know, they changed the intestinal, so it is not needed to be acidified because there is no litter.
That's it. There's no litter to treat. There's no litter to acidify. It's up.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Carrier? Okay. With that, join me in thanking Denis for coming today.
Thank you.